They say every old house has a soul, but mine had a secret. I bought the Blackwood estate for a song. A crumbling Victorian relic on the edge of a forest that seemed to swallow the light. The realtor wouldn't step past the porch. He just handed me the keys, his hands shaking, and whispered, "Don't open the heavy door." The heavy door was at the top of a narrow, spiraling staircase. It led to the attic. It was made of thick oak, reinforced with iron straps, and secured by a bolt so rusted it looked like it had been fused by fire. The first night was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that feels like someone is holding their breath right next to your ear. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Then, at 3 a.m., the first sound came. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't a mouse. It was rhythmic, like a single, bony finger tapping on the floorboards directly above my head. Slowly, it moved from the center of the room to the corner, then back again. I tried to ignore it. Old houses creak, I told the darkness. But then came the scraping, a long, agonizing sound of something heavy being dragged across the wood, something that sounded wet. I grabbed my flashlight and crept up the stairs. The air grew colder with every step. When I reached the attic door, I stopped. My breath came out in a white mist. I pressed my ear to the cold oak. Inside, there was a sound I'll never forget. A wet, papery wheeze, like someone trying to breathe through a throat filled with dry leaves. "Is it you?" The voice didn't come from the room. It felt like it vibrated through the wood into my very skull. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the rusted bolt. There were fresh scratches on the iron. Small, precise marks, as if something had been trying to slide the bolt from the inside. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a butcher knife, watching the ceiling. As the sun began to rise, I saw a dark liquid dripping from the light fixture in the hallway. I touched it. It was cold, thick, and smelled of old copper and stagnant water. Something was up there. Something that had been waiting decades for a new landlord. And it wasn't planning on leaving. Вот вторая часть истории. В стиле кота-бегемота здесь нарастает саспенс. Мы переходим от звуков к первому визуальному контакту. He Lies in My Attic, Part 2. The Milky Eye. The sun did little to wash away the dread of the night. That copper-smelling liquid was still there, a dark stain on the hallway ceiling that refused to dry. I spent the morning paced like a caged animal. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a mockery. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see. Not open the door, not yet, but just see. I climbed a spiral staircase again. The air in the narrow hallway was thick, like breathing through a wet cloth. I reached the heavy oak door. The rusted bolt looked even more disturbed now, as if something had been gnawing on the metal. I knelt down. My knees cracked in the silence, sounding like gunshots. The keyhole was old-fashioned, a large, dark void shaped like a teardrop. I trembled as I leaned forward, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. At first, I saw nothing but gray. Just a vast, dusty emptiness filled with the skeletons of old furniture covered in white sheets. But then the shadows shifted. In the far corner, near the small circular window, something moved. It was long, too long to be human. A limb, pale and thin as a birch branch, unfolded from behind a stack of rotting trunks. It moved with a sickening, jerky motion like a spider with broken legs. I stopped breathing. I pressed my eye tighter against the cold metal. The thing dragged itself into the faint circle of light. It was a person, or it used to be. Its skin was the color of a drowned man, stretched so tight over its bones that I could see every vertebrae, every rib. It had no hair, only a map of blue veins pulsing beneath a translucent scalp. Then it stopped. It didn't have ears, or at least I couldn't see them, but it seemed to sense me. It turned its head, a slow 180-degree rotation that made a dry, snapping sound like breaking kindling. I froze. My soul felt like it was shrinking. The creature didn't have a face like ours. Its mouth was a jagged slit, stitched shut with what looked like rusted copper wire. But its eyes, or rather its eye, one was a sunken pit of black rot. The other was a massive, milky white orb, devoid of a pupil, swirling with a ghostly film. It began to crawl toward the door. Fast. Slap. 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 The sound of wet palms hitting the floorboards echoed in the confined space. I tried to pull away, but my muscles were paralyzed by a primal, icy terror. The mill key, I filled the other side of the keyhole. It was so close I could smell it. A stench of mothballs, damp earth, and something sweet like rotting peaches. I see, little bird. The whisper wasn't in the air. It was inside my brain, cold and sharp as a needle. I finally found my voice and let out a strangled gasp, falling backward down the first few steps. I scrambled to my feet and ran, locking myself in the downstairs bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, gasping for air. When I looked in the mirror, I screamed. There, in the center of my forehead, was a faint red mark, the exact shape of a teardrop keyhole, and it felt burning hot, as if a ghost had branded me through the wood. Here is part 3 rewritten in English, maintaining the atmospheric, slow-burn horror style of World Begemot Caught. He lives in my attic, part 3, The Silent Town. I fled the house without looking back. The engine of my old sedan roared to life, and I tore down the gravel driveway toward the town. I needed to see people, living, breathing, loud people. I wanted to hear the clinking of coffee cups, not the rustle of dead leaves inside my own skull. The town met me with a gray sky and a heavy, suffocating silence. I stepped into a local diner, my boots thudding hollowly on the linoleum. Behind the counter sat an old man in a greasy cap, slowly stirring a cup of cold tea. His spoon hit the rim, clink, 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 in the exact same rhythm as the tapping on my attic floor. I need help, I blurted out. My voice cracked, reduced to a dry rasp. The Blackwood estate. There's something in there. Upstairs. The old man froze. The spoon stopped. He slowly raised his eyes, and my heart skipped a beat. His left eye was clouded with a familiar milky film. Just a sliver, a faint cataract like lime scale on a kettle. Blackwood, he croaked. There is no inside in that house, son. There is only before and after. He leaned toward me, and he smelled exactly like that keyhole, mothballs and damp earth. The thing under the roof isn't a guest. He's the landlord, and you're just new skin for old bones. I bolted out of the diner, consumed by a cold panic. I drove to the local archives, a small, crumbling library, hoping to find anything about the house's construction. The librarian, a woman with skin like yellowed parchment, didn't even look up as I stumbled in. Third shelf? Black binding, she said before I even opened my mouth. I found the book. It was a diary of the house's first builder, dated 1890. The pages were eaten by mold, but on the final leaf, I saw a sketch. A skeletal hand clutching a key. Below was a line that made my knees buckle. He did not ask for a door. He asked for a vessel. It is too cold in the void. He needs a house made of flesh. I slammed the book shut and sprinted for the exit, but the library doors wouldn't budge. Outside, it was still daylight, but the windows began to frost over rapidly from the inside. "Where are you going, little bird?" the librarian's voice hissed. I turned. She was standing in the shadows of the stacks, her jaw hanging at an unnatural angle, as if the muscles of her face had simply dissolved. From her open mouth, a thin, pale arm, white as a tree root, slowly extended, reaching for me. I smashed a side window with a chair and dove into my car. I drove back toward the house, fueled by a terrifying realization. The key in my pocket had begun to vibrate. It didn't just unlock the attic, it was pulling me back. The house wasn't a trap, it was a magnet. And the further I drove, the more the brand on my forehead burned. When I screeched to a halt at the porch, the sun had already set. The attic window was no longer dusty. It was glowing from within with a soft, sickly yellow light. And there, pressed against the glass, was no longer just one figure. There were 3, and they were all waving at me with their broken, jagged limbs. He lives in my attic, part 4, the fire that wouldn't burn. The sight of those 3 pale silhouettes waving from the attic window broke something inside me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a frantic, oily desperation. If the town was silent and the archives were cursed, then there was only one solution left. I would erase the house. I would turn the Blackwood estate into an altar of ash. I ran to the garage, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grip the red plastic handle of the gasoline can. I didn't care about my belongings. My books, my clothes, my memories, they were all tainted now, soaked in the smell of mothballs and rot. I began in the hallway, dousing the floorboards. The liquid glug 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 of the fuel was the only sound in the oppressive silence. I moved to the stairs, splashing the wood until the air was thick with the stinging scent of chemicals. Burn, I whisper, my voice a jagged edge. Burn in hell. I stood at the front door and struck a match. The small flame danced for a second before I dropped it onto the soaked rug. Whoosh. A wall of orange fire roared to life. It climbed the walls, licking the wallpaper, turning the grand staircase into a ladder of flame. I backed out onto the lawn, watching the black smoke billow into the night sky. I waited for the screams. I waited for the creatures to come crashing through the attic glass, wailing as the heat consumed their ancient, dry skin. But the screams never came. The fire behaved strangely. It reached the ceiling of the second floor, right beneath the attic, and then it stopped. It didn't spread. It didn't consume. The flames curled back on themselves, turning a sickly, bruised purple color. The heat didn't radiate outward. Instead, the air around me grew colder. Frost began to bloom on the grass at my feet, even as the house stood engulfed in a violet inferno. I watched in horror as the fire began to flow upward, not as smoke, but as if it were being inhaled. The attic window didn't crack. The wood didn't char. The house was drinking the fire. Then the front door, the one I had just stepped through, slowly creaked open. There was no fire inside anymore. Only a charred, blackened hallway that looked like it had been dead for 100 years. Standing in the center of the scorched rug was the creature. It was taller now, its skin no longer pale but blackened like soot, though it hadn't been burned. It had absorbed the heat. It stepped onto the porch, its long, needle-like fingers twitching. Warmth, it wheezed. The voice didn't come from its stitched mouth. It echoed from the very ground beneath my boots. Thank you for the warmth. Little bird. The brand on my forehead didn't just burn now. It split. A thin line of blood trickled down my nose. I realized then that I hadn't attacked the house. I had fed it. The fire had settled the void the builder wrote about. The creature took a step toward me, and as its foot hit the grass, the blades of green turned to gray ash instantly. It wasn't coming to kill me. It was coming to come inside. He lies in my attic, Part 5, The Warped Woods. I didn't wait for it to take a second step. I turned and sprinted toward the wall of ancient pines that bordered the estate. My lungs burned, and the frigid air felt like glass in my throat. I didn't head for the road. The town was a graveyard of silent, milky-eyed watchers. I headed for the deep woods, hoping the chaotic labyrinth of roots and shadows would hide me. But as soon as I crossed the tree line, the world tilted. The forest didn't smell like pine and damp earth anymore. It smelled like the attic. The air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of mothballs and old, dry paper. I ran for what felt like miles, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. But every time I looked up, the trees seemed to be leaning inward, toward me. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a massive oak. My hand recoiled instantly. The bark wasn't rough and wooden. It felt like cold, leathery skin. I looked closer. The ridges of the bark were shaped like thousands of tiny, closed eyelids. I looked back the way I came. I should have been miles from the house by now. But there, through a gap in the twisting branches, was the glow. That sickly violet light. I wasn't moving away from the Blackwood estate. I was circling it. No. I whimpered, my voice small in the vast, reaching silence. I ran straight. I didn't turn. I picked a new direction, toward the North Star, and ran again. I climbed over fallen logs that felt like charred limbs. I waded through a creek where the water didn't flow. It just sat there, black and thick as oil, reflecting a sky that had no stars. 10 minutes later, I broke through a thicket of thorns and tumbled onto a manicured lawn. My lawn. I was standing exactly where I had started, right in front of the scorched porch. The blackened creature was gone from the steps, but the front door was wide open, like a hungry mouth. I looked at my watch. The hands weren't moving. They They were spinning backward, faster and faster, until they snapped off and rattled behind the glass. Then, I heard the sound from the woods. Snap, snap, snap. It wasn't just one creature anymore. For the shadows of the eyelid trees, dozens of them were emerging. They were thin, gray, and jerky, their limbs elongated like pulled taffy. They didn't walk. They drifted, their feet barely touching the ashen grass. They weren't attacking. They were forming a circle, a silent audience of pale, unblinking spectators. And they were all looking at the attic. The brand on my forehead began to pulse with a rhythmic, blinding pain. My vision blurred, turning the world into a teardrop-shaped smear. The woods are the walls. The voice wheezed into my mind. The sky is the ceiling. You're not in the house, little bird. The house is in you. I realized then that the geography of the world had collapsed. There was no outside left. The forest was just a hallway. The clearing was just a room. And the only way I was up, toward the heavy oak door. The circle of gray watchers didn't move. They simply stood there, their long, spindly limbs casting shadows that stretched across the ashen grass like reaching fingers. I knew then that there was no running left. The woods were just a painted backdrop, and the world had shrunk to the size of a single, rotting estate. I stepped onto the scorched porch. The wood groaned under my boots, a sound like a dying animal. The air inside the house was different now. It didn't just smell like rot. It felt heavy, like walking through deep water. Every step toward the spiral staircase was an act of war against my own instincts. My legs were heavy, as if the house was trying to pull my feet through the floorboards. Creak, creak, creak. As I climbed, the walls began to change. The charred wallpaper wasn't peeling, it was shedding. Beneath the soot, I saw layers of old, yellowed letters and telegrams from the 1800s, all written in a frantic, illegible scrawl. Thousands of them, pasted over each other like scales. Don't let the light in, one scrap read. He hates the sun. I reached the top landing. The heavy oak door stood there, waiting. The rusted bolt was no longer closed. It was shattered, the iron fragments lying on the floor like teeth. The door was cracked open just an inch, a sliver of darkness peering out. The brand on my forehead was no longer just a mark. It was a hole. I could feel the cold attic air blowing out of my own skull. My vision was bifurcated. With one eye, I saw the hallway. With the other, I saw only a vast gray void. I pushed the door. It didn't creak. It slid open with a sound like a knife through silk. The attic was larger than the house itself. It stretched out into an impossible cathedral of dust and bone. Thousands of keys hung from the ceiling on invisible wires, swaying in a wind that shouldn't have existed. And in the center, sitting on a throne of stacked, rotting trunks, was the landlord. He was no longer a charred creature. He was a mass of shifting, translucent membranes, held together by the same rusted copper wire I had seen through the keyhole. He was weaving something. He was weaving a suit of skin. Welcome, home. The voice didn't come from him. It came from the thousands of keys clinking together. The wood is old. The stone is cold. But the pulse is warm. He stood up, his height reaching the vaulted shadows. He reached out a hand with 7 fingers, each ending in a needle-sharp nail. He didn't want to kill me. He was holding a key made of bone. I looked at the key, and then I looked at my own chest. There, right above my heart, was a new mark. A keyhole carved into my flesh, waiting for the turn. The landlord didn't move fast. He didn't have to. The space between us was no longer physical. It was a debt being collected. Every beat of my heart felt like a hammer striking an anvil, forging the final link in a chain that had been started a century ago. The bone key in his hand began to glow with that same sickly, violet light I had seen from the lawn. I tried to scream, to turn, to throw myself from the attic window, but my body was no longer mine. My legs were rooted to the floorboards, and I could feel my skin beginning to harden, turning gray and textured like the eyelid bark of the warped trees. A house is a shell. The keys chimed in unison, a crystalline chorus of 1,000 dead voices. A body is a home. He leaned over me, his height reaching into the infinite shadows of the rafters. His face, that jagged, wire-stitched slit, began to unravel. The copper wires snapped one by one with a sound like violin strings breaking. Behind the skin was nothing but a hollow, pulsing vacuum. He pressed the bone key against the hole in my chest. There was no pain. There was only a cold so absolute it felt like being plunged into an ocean of liquid nitrogen. I felt the tumblers of my soul shift. Click! My vision didn't go black. It expanded. I felt the attic floor beneath my feet, but I also felt the rafters above my head. I felt the plumbing in the walls like veins and the electrical wiring like a nervous system. I felt the wind hitting the siding of the house as if it were hitting my own skin. I wasn't standing in the attic anymore. I was the attic. I watched from the ceiling as my own body, the little bird, collapsed. But it didn't stay down. The landlord, now a mist of gray vapor, poured himself into my empty shell. I watched through my own dead eyes as my fingers twitched, as my chest began to heave with a stolen breath. He stood up using my legs. He smoothed the hair on my head with my hands. He walked to the dusty mirror in the corner and smiled, a jagged, stitched smile that didn't fit my face. Finally, he whispered, using my voice. It sounded resonant, warm, and terrifyingly alive. Finally, I can leave. He turned and walked out of the attic, down the spiral staircase, and out the front door. I watched him from every window of the house. I watched him walk through the warped woods, which straightened and turned back into normal pines as he passed. The eyelids on the bark closed for the last time. The circle of gray watchers bowed as he walked by, and then, one by one, they dissolved into ash, their purpose served. Now I sit here in the silence. I am the Blackwood estate. I am the creak in the floorboards and the rust on the bolt. I am the copper smell in the hallway and the cold draft under the door. The sun has risen and set 1,000 times, but for me, it is always 3:14 a.m. I am waiting. I am waiting for the next little bird to see the for sale sign. I am waiting for someone to complain about the price, to admire the vaulted ceilings, and to wonder why the attic door is bolted so tight. And when they finally find the key, I'll be here, whispering from the ceiling, because it's so cold in the wood, and I really need a house made of flesh.